share our source sheet. I'll zoom in so everyone can see it. All right, I think we got everything set. So we are making our way through Sefer Devarim. This week we read Parshat Re'eh, which has, as with every Parshat Devarim, lots of interesting stuff. We're going to focus tonight on the mitzvah of Ma'aser Sheini.
Oh, that's so interesting.
The second tithe. So who can tell us a little bit what's Ma'aser Sheini and what makes it the second tithe?
Well, the first tithe is definitely given right away every year, but there's a cycle over a period of 7 years, and the Maaser Sheini is not given in a sense. It's not exactly the same each time it comes up. Let's put it that way. Sometimes it can be thought of as something that one has close to one's house, and in other situations, it's something that one can bring to Yerushalayim under special circumstances. It's very interesting. Really.
Okay, so thank you for starting that, Anne. There's actually, as you correctly noted, there is a cycle of different maasers, different tithes that are offered. Every year we have to give Maaser Rishon. Maaser Rishon goes to the Levium. When you go to the Shuk in Israel and it says Trumot and Masrot were separated, that's the Maaser that's being referred to. And then it's a 7-year cycle, right? The 7th year being, of course, Shemitah, which we're about to begin. This coming Rosh Hashanah begins a Shemitah year. In years 1, 2, 4, and 5. There was what's called Maaser Sheini. That's what we're going to be focusing on. Maaser Sheini was to be consumed in Jerusalem. And as Anne already alluded to, there is a possibility of redeeming that produce for money to be spent in Jerusalem rather than having to bring all of the produce with you. So that's Maaser Sheini. In years 3 and 6, there was Maaser Ani. Tithe to the poor, which would be given to the poor. So that's the general framework of the maaser, of the maasrot that we had to give. Maaser Rishon every year to the Levium, Maaser Sheini to be consumed by the owner in Jerusalem, and Maaser Ani to be given to the poor. As the Torah introduces this to us, it's fascinating the way that it does it. First of all, I know that we've spoken about the introductory verse many times before. For me, one of the most interesting insights in the Gemara comes from this verse: "Aser ta'aser et kol tvuat zarecha yotei sadeh shana shana." You shall surely tithe all the produce of your fields that is produced every year. The Gemara says on this repetition of "aser ta'aser," "aser bishvil shetit asher." Give a tithe in order that you will become wealthy, right? Which is very counterproductive. The Gemara is telling us, give away your money in order to accumulate more money. Give away your wealth in order to accumulate more wealth. We're not going to talk about that this year, but it is something that I find very striking and very inspiring to give some thought to that. So I wanted to just throw it out there. Okay, so give a tithe every year. ויאכלת לפני השם אלוקיך במקום אשר יבחר לשכן שמו שם, מעשר דגנך תירשך ויצרך ובקרות בקרך וצונך למען תלמד ליראת השם אלוקיך כל הימים. You will eat it before Hashem, your Lord, in the place that he will choose to dwell his name there, the tithes of your produce and of your vineyards and of the firstborns of your cattle and of your sheep, in order that you will learn to fear Hashem, your Lord, all of the days. And here's what Anne was talking about. Oh, I should give the English up here, sorry. V'chi yirbeh mimcha haderech, ki lo tuchal seito, ki yerchak mimcha makom asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha lasum shmo sham, ki yivarechecha Hashem Elokecha. If the distance is too great, and you can't carry it because it's too distant, and God has blessed you with wealth that you can't carry it all to the temple, then you can redeem the produce with money and carry the money to spend in the temple or in Jerusalem. But you can spend it on whatever you want, on souvenirs, on falafel, on shawarma, on sfarim, whatever you like, right? Do not abandon the Levi. He doesn't have any of his own land. Every third year, you should leave this tithe at the gates of your property, and the Levium and the poor and the widows and the orphans will come because they don't have their own produce to accumulate and to enjoy. And every 7 years, you should have a Shemitah. Bezedavar Shemitah tells us what the Shemitah is. To leave all the land fallow. It's not just a tithe, it's now all of your produce. And then finally, this section ends, or we'll see if it's a section, in verse 7. Ki yihiyeh v'cha evyon me'achad achecha b'achad sharecha ba'artzecha asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach lo ta'ametz et levavcha v'lo tikpos et yadcha me'achicha ha'evyon ki patoch tiftach et yadcha lo v'avet tavitenu demech saro asher yechsar lo. If one of your brethren is destitute and poor, they have nothing, do not be stiff-hearted to withhold from them, but rather you should give them whatever it is that they need.
That's okay.
So it seems like we have an interesting unit here, focused on what we have to do with our wealth and with our possessions, right? So we're told we have this Maser cycle where for most of the years we bring our produce or the money equivalent to Jerusalem to enjoy it there or to spend the money there. Every third year we have I don't want to call it an added, but a different responsibility, which is Maser Ani, to leave a tithe at the gates of our property for those who are propertyless and destitute to come and take whatever they want. We're then given the mitzvah of Shemitah. We're then given the mitzvah of Tzedakah. The Akedat Yitzchak of Yitzchak Arama says that this is actually very intentional, the order in which the Torah presents this. And it's meant to kind of ease us in to the ultimate responsibility. Ultimately, what we have to do is care for the poor and the destitute by giving them whatever it is that they need and desire. Right? As the Torah said, whatever he is lacking, we have to provide for them. The Gemara there says that if someone was very wealthy and they become poor, that we have to actually provide for them. If they were accustomed to having a horse running in front of them and servants, we have to provide that for them. Right? Whatever it is that they're lacking, even if they're lacking something of great cost and great expense. So the Akedat Yitzchak says that the ultimate goal of the Torah is to get us to the point where we feel comfortable and able and willing to give away Dei Mechsaro, whatever it is that our fellow is lacking. But if the Torah were to just tell us you have to give whatever the poor is lacking, whatever they need, that would be a bit of a hard sell. And that would be hard to sustain. So the Torah kind of eases us into it. It says that the Torah begins by saying, take a little bit of your own wealth, of your own produce, and you can enjoy it. But we're going to set parameters about how you enjoy it. Take it to Jerusalem, eat it in the temple, in the environs of the temple, spend money supporting those who make the capital city run, and do whatever you want with it. Just kind of do it within those parameters. And then a little bit more difficult is set aside a little bit for the poor. Once you accept this setting aside a little bit of the poor, the idea of Shemitah, of leaving your land fallow for an entire year, is a little bit more palatable. Still not easy, right? It's still quite a challenge. And we'll be hearing, I'm sure, about that challenge a lot in the coming year, and the preparations being made for it now. But it's easier if you have the context, the pretext of these two maasers coming first. And once you've gone a year without collecting, with leaving your property for the poor to take as they need, it then becomes an easier ask to say that you need to be able to provide for the poor at any time that they need whatever it is that they need. So he says that the way the Torah presents it is a way to kind of ease us in to the ultimate goal, which is to provide unquestionably whatever it is that our destitute brothers need and desire. Any thoughts on that?
Nope.
I'm trying to find the page in a cookbook here, just in case people haven't seen a particular thing. But when we went to Yerushalayim one time that we were able to go, when Joshua was studying at Male Adumim, there was a particular dish that I really was hoping maybe we would have a chance to have, and it's very difficult to make. And so I'm looking for the picture of it. But we went to a restaurant on, I think it was actually near on King David something or other, and a street, and I don't remember the name of the place, but I asked for the dish. It is a kind of stuffed rice made covering up over something, and it's very, very difficult to make. And they came back, it's called kibbeh.
Mm-hmm.
And they came back and they said that they had some, but it was frozen or something. It was just not available. And I had tried to make it. It is not easy to work with ground rice. I don't know if anybody here has tried it. I mean, it looks just
So
absolutely
what is the relation
delicious.
with Sheini?
So yeah, so when we went, I was thinking that this was our opportunity to kind of to think of it as a Maser Sheini, to spend something much more than we might think we would, just in order to do it, just as a Maser Sheini. So in the restaurant, they relented and they brought it to me, and it was such a joy. So here's a little bit of a picture. I don't know if you can see it or not, but I'll try to show it. I don't know if there's enough light on it, but you can see you're working with ground rice and you're making a shell by yourself, and then you put the meat into it. It is really an art. Okay. And so that's what I think of when I think of this. Anything that you want. Sorry.
Anything you want. Okay. We're going to skip down to source number 6, the Abarbanel, then we'll come back to 3, 4, and 5. The Abarbanel asks an interesting question, right? Whether we accept the Kedat Yitzchak's understanding of the development that he claims the Torah is making, the Abarbanel asks as follows: V'tomar im kain, ma to'elet behefresh hama'aser mishar ha'tvuot acharei shezu v'zu yochlu abalim. What's the point of separating out this ma'aser if in the end of the day the owner is going to eat everything, right? Why bother? Why separate it out? What's the point? And he answers, Dalacha sheish bazeh to'elet atzum. Says there's a great benefit to doing this. Tusha behefrishcha oto ha'maaser, v'holichecha oto l'Yerushalayim le'echlo sham l'shem mitzvah lifnei Hashem tilmad li'arat Hashem. Says that by taking this separated tithe and walking it, carrying it to Jerusalem to eat it there for the sake of the mitzvah before Hashem, you will learn to fear Hashem. And it will help you to become more God-fearing and to achieve good character traits. ולהתלמד בקיום הציוויים האלוקים שבזה הרגל יקנה בנפשו תכונה טובה מהכנעה לשם יתברך ויראתו. Right, and you will become, you'll be better equipped to follow God's commandments. וגם תהיה הלמידה ההיא במקדש. Okay, so he says that it will help you to acquire this attribute of fearing God, right, which the Psukim told us. The Torah told us back in source number 1, "V'yachalta lifnei Hashem Elokecha b'makom asher yivchar l'shakin shemo sham, ma'aser derancha tirashcha b'tzarecha u'v'charot b'karcha b'tzonecha, l'man tilmad li'arat Hashem Elokecha kol hayamim." You'll eat it before God in the place that He will choose, in order that you will learn to fear God all the days of your life. Okay, so on the one hand, he's saying that this kind of instills in us that attitude and awareness that we are following God's commandments all the time, right? It's kind of training us to do what God tells us to do. Doesn't necessarily answer the question. His answer, I'm not sure, necessarily answers the question about why we have to separate this out and set it aside, right? We have 612 other mitzvot that also teach us to follow God's commandments. So how specifically this one does, I'm not sure the Abarbanel answers it. I think there is much value, and I think that this is something that we can think about in separating it out and having it remain in your house for an extended period of time serves as a reminder that you are already on your way to Israel, right? You could think about Rabbi Nachman, wherever I go, I'm going to Israel. And certainly there are many who have kind of a designated fund, whether it's a separate bank account or money set aside, to be able to go on a trip to Israel. I know our Israel account has grown more than we'd like it to because we couldn't take a trip due to COVID. But to have that money set aside and to always have the capacity, the capability to be able to go and have that reminder that you have a reason to be going, I think is something very powerful and something that can be helpful to all of us as we, in our economic reality where we're not bringing the produce of our fields, but certainly, as Anne said, to go with a open wallet, willingness to spend. Don't worry. Most of the storekeepers make sure that we spend our inflated prices, and but to have that awareness, I think, is something very powerful and very important for us living in America to have in mind. Some similar explanations, I think, along the lines of the Barbanel, that kind of, I'm not sure, address the particulars of Maser Sheini in a way that I find completely satisfying, but nonetheless helps us to think about it. The Rashbam in source number 3, and this is echoed by Tigay, the modern scholar, in the JPS commentary. The Rashbam says,
Yeah, Jeff Tigay.
Really?
Leman tilmad lira, in order that you will learn to fear God. How does Maser Sheini help you come to fear of God? It says when you come to the temple and you see it in full operation, the Kohanim doing the service, the Leviim singing and doing their help work, and Yisrael, the Israelites standing and observing and participating in the way that they do, seeing the temple in its operation will bring about the fear of God. So this is very beautiful, and there, hopefully the Beit HaMikdash, and by extension our shuls, which are Mikdash Ma'at, do bring about a sense of awe and fear of God. But again, I don't know how Maser Sheini is unique there. There's many, many mitzvot that are temple-centered, and how Maser Sheini is different than any one of those, I'm not sure the Rashbam addresses at all. But that's his explanation. Tigay, just to see in more modern context, so that you may learn to revere the Lord forever. Reverence will be fostered by contact with the priests in the chosen city. to teach the people piety and law. Another possibility is that the festive celebration of God's bounty will teach people reverence by keeping them aware of their dependence on God, to prevent them from taking their prosperity for granted. Right? So there's nothing about Maaser Sheini that's connected to the holidays, but the reality is most people would bring their Maaser Sheini when they went on Aliyah Levega, when they went on pilgrimage for the holidays. And that the time frame with which you have to bring it and to consume it in Jerusalem is connected to the Shalosh Regalim, to the holiday cycle. So it makes good sense. But again, nothing specifically about Maaser Sheini that goes here, right? Anytime anyone would come to Jerusalem for any purpose, the same goal would be achieved if that's what the goal is. The Sfornos, I think, in a similar line of thought, says that how does Maaser Sheini come to fear of God? Connected to the temple was the place of the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court. So seeing the court in action would lead ultimately to fear of God. Again, not unique to Maaser Sheini, right? If you came to the temple for any other reason, the Sanhedrin would still be there, and you would see it. So I'm not sure that any of these fully answer the question about what's special about Maaser Sheini in this regard.
He called me
I could be wrong.
the end of the day.
I could. Anyone disagree with my take on these? My critique?
I actually happen to know Jeff Teague. I studied with him together with
Oh,
him.
wow.
Wonderful fellow. He's
Mhm.
just he's a real mensch. Wonderful man. The reverence by keeping them aware of their dependence on God and prevent from taking their prosperity for granted. I thought that was more directly connected. Were you saying you didn't think that was true of Maaser Sheini?
No,
Also, or
but why bring? How does bringing it to the temple connect to that? That's my question.
I see.
They say that coming to the temple, seeing the temple in its operation, its full splendor, or seeing the Sanhedrin in operation is what will bring about the fear of God. But what about Maaser Sheini is connected to that? Is the question I had.
So they don't connect it.
Do you think it's something about the bringing of the two together?
How so?
So it's not just setting aside some of your material possession for the services of God, and it's not just being in Jerusalem, but it's doing the one in order to do the other.
So it's the argument against compartmentalization. Right? You might think that, right? Eat your food, eat, drink, and be merry when you're home. But when you come to Jerusalem, it's only about the Beit HaMikdash. It's only about, I like that. It's only about seeing, the world of God, as it were. But that's only in Jerusalem. But you're saying that it's about merging the two. It's about bringing the stuff that you would physically enjoy in your own home and being able to do that in the vicinity of the temple, in the context of being in the Beis HaMikdash. That's beautiful. I like that, Beatrice. Thank you.
So, just to clarify, if they come to the Shalosh Regalim, that which they're bringing, weren't there also occasion where you couldn't bring your produce or your crops for the Shalosh Regalim, for the korban? So you would change that into money. Also, would that go to the priest so that the Maaser Sheini doesn't go to the priest? So that's the difference between the two?
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, some of the korban, there's often an opportunity to redeem or to replace a korban with money, or to bring money and then buy the animal when you get there. But right, that the difference is that Maaser Sheini is enjoyed by the owner, as opposed to, there were some of the sacrifices of the festival also. The chagiga was also enjoyed was eaten by the pilgrim in the temple. But there was more leeway with the Maaser Sheini to buy whatever it is that you want to buy. Enjoy it however you want to enjoy it.
then maybe there is an argument to be made that you wouldn't be greedy about giving your korban, if I give you everything, what do I end up with? Oh, here's something that I have at the same time. So I don't resent the korban when I come to the temple, and I appreciate God
No,
for
that's
the
interesting.
bounty that I have also.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
A negative thought, but
No,
there you
no.
go.
I mean, most of the korbanot for the holiday, there was an element of sharing already. I
Right.
mean, some went to the priest, some went to the owner, but I could see how there might be a sense of resentment of why is he getting all the hard work that I put into raising this animal. So that's interesting too. That maybe it helps lower any resentment that there might have been. I like that too. All right, I'm glad I shared this with everyone here. Thank you. Let's move on to the Netziv. The Netziv in source number 7 says something quite interesting. So he says as follows. And he begins by quoting a Sifrei, which is brought in the Tosfot and Kiddushin. T'chol echad lo nitan maser Sheini ela bishvil Talmud Torah v'yira. Right, that the mitzvah of Maser Sheini was given only to promote Talmud Torah, Torah study, and fear of God. HaPerush, what does that mean? He Maser Sheini enu nechal ela b'Yushalayim. V'I efshar leba'alim le'echol b'imshoch yemei regalim sheba'al Yushalayim kol asirit tfuato. Right, that it could only be eaten in Jerusalem, and it would be impossible for one person to eat the entirety of it during the short time that they come to Jerusalem for the holiday. Right, a tenth of all that a farm produces over the course of a year is a lot of food. It's impossible to eat that all in one short week in Jerusalem. The al karkach o yeshev ve'asmo b'Yushalayim gam acharei haregel harei ein lo esek shama. So the only way to get around it is he would have to extend his stay in Jerusalem. He has no real business there. He has no real reason to be there. The only thing that would keep him, that he would be able to do, is ki'im Talmud Torah, right? That he would learn. O sheminiach letalmidim b'Yushalayim mitzeh talmidim mitparnasim umit rabim. Or the other alternative is that he would give some of the produce to the yeshiva students already in Jerusalem. You can still do that nowadays. There's many yeshiva students who would happily take any food that you leave out at the back of the yeshiva and scarf it down in a second, right? But that they would, that you could leave it for the students of Torah, and this will give them what to live off of, and it will allow for an abundance of Torah students. Okay, so that's the basic point of what he says. He says that the point is, right, that we have to bring such a huge amount of food to Jerusalem when we're only there for a short period of time, and the underlying effect of this is that it will lead either to more farmers staying and studying Torah in Jerusalem for a longer period of time, or for the support of students of Torah who are already in Jerusalem who don't have their own way of making money, which is quite interesting. Parenthetically, the Netziv has to me it was a very similar idea about the Korban Toda, the Thanksgiving offering.
Mhm.
So the Thanksgiving offering was comprised of many loaves of bread, many different kinds of bread and cakes and fried dough and everything. And
Kiddush, in other words.
a kiddush. And the rules of the Korban Toda are such that it was a lot of food that had to be eaten in a short amount of time. So the Netziv there in source number 8 says that the reason for these curious detail that the Torah requires us to eat so much food in such a short amount of time is that it should be impossible for one person to do it on their own. And so why are you doing a Korban Toda? Because something miraculous happens to you, something wonderful happens to you. He says the whole point is to have others join in your celebration, in your happiness. So the Torah forces us to share our wealth, to share our good with others, in order that we will not be alone at this occasion. That we'll be celebrating and sharing it with others. Which to me sounds very similar to what he's saying here with Maser Sheini. Not exactly, but seems to be something that resonated with the Netziv, and it resonates with me as well. Tige again just kind of spells this out in modern terms. It's not clear how the farmer and his household could consume the entire tithe during pilgrimage to the sanctuary. In the course of a 354-day lunar year, a household producing at subsistence level would theoretically require 35.4 days to consume 10% of its produce. The three pilgrimage festivals require farmers and their households to be present in the chosen city for 9 days each year. In so short a time, they could not consume 35 days worth of produce, plus firstling, festival offerings, and other sacrifices that would have to be consumed at the same time. Assuming that the farmers invited the Levites and the poor to the meals as required, even if they doubled their normal consumption at the festivals, they could not dispose of all the food involved unless they were as many Levites and poor as there were members of the farmer's household, which is unlikely. Right? The economics and the math of it don't quite make sense. Conceivably, the law aimed to encourage farmers to travel to the sanctuary more often. Would have been extremely difficult for those living so far away to do so. Okay, so again, he's just saying that the math doesn't quite make sense. There has to be some way to balance the scales or to make this realistic. And so we can turn to the Netziv that perhaps the way that this was made realistic was by sharing with Torah students or with the poor that were already in Jerusalem as a way of involving others in our celebration, which I think is quite lovely. Okay, the next step, I think building on what we've seen so far, is the Sefer Chinuch. The Sefer Chinuch, as you'll remember, is a book which counts the mitzvot and gives explanations. It gives his explanation for why we have each of the mitzvot. So he says when it comes to the mitzvah of Maser Sheini, mitzvah shakil baruch bachar ba'amisor v'chafetz lamanti kol yot kulam oskei Torato v'yodei shmo. God wants every Jewish person to know the Torah and to study Torah. And in God's great wisdom, He gave us this mitzvah so that everyone will learn. It says most people are more inclined to follow their physical desires for food, for meat, than they are for studying Torah. Al kain sivev b'tvunato v'natan lahem mekom sheyidu hakol divrei Torato al kol panim she'ein safek ki kol adam nimshach likvad yirato b'makom shemamano sham. Right. So therefore, we had to associate our money with the place of learning. Lachin. Halot kol ish ma'aser kol bakar v'tzon shalo shana shana b'makom she'asak ha'chachma v'torah sham v'hi Yerushalayim. So therefore, every year when a person brings his tithes and his animal offerings to the center of our national wisdom, learning, which is Jerusalem, shesham Sanhedrin yodei da'at u'mevine mitmada, where the Sanhedrin sits, mokin na'aleh l'sham ma'aser tuato tuatenu barbashanei hashmita. We take our maser during the 4 years of the Shemitah cycle. Moshe Yadua Shemaser Sheini Nechal Sham, because Maser Sheini is eaten in Jerusalem. V'chein Neter Revi'i, etc., etc. Lots of things that we have to eat specifically in Jerusalem. O Yelech Sham Bal Mamon Atzmo Lilmod Torah. O Yishlach Sham Echad Mibanav Shilmad Sham V'yeh Nazon Be'otan Beirot. So either the farmer himself will go to study Torah with the food that he has to bring and distribute, or one of the members of his house he'll send to do it for him. Mitoch kach yeh b'chol bayit ubayit mikol Yisrael ish chacham yodea haTorah. In every household, there'll be at least one person who knows Torah. Asher yomad b'chachmato kol beit aviv, asher yilamed b'chachmato, who will teach every other member of the family. V'chein timalei haaretz deya et Hashem, and therefore the land will be filled with the knowledge of God. Kim chacham echad levad yeh be'ir, or afilu asara yu harbei mibnei adam shebe'ir, v'kol shekein hanashim v'ayeladim shelo yavo lifneihem ki im b'ham achad b'shana, or afilu yishmu divreihem pam achad b'shavua yelchu lebeitam v'yashlichu kol divrei chacham acharei gom. Right? If it were the case that we didn't require every person to come to the centralized center of learning to learn for themselves, but we sort of shipped out all of the teachers and all the scholars throughout the land, then it would be the case that there'd be one knowledgeable person in a city, even if there were 10, even if there were a number of them. Each person would go to hear a shir once a week, hear a drasha, right? It says women and children would go even less frequently. And as soon as they got home, they would forget what they learned. They would throw it away. Aval b'yota milamed b'chol bayit ubayit shochein sham erev v'boker v'tzarayim yazhirim tamid az yu kulam anashim v'nashim v'yiladim mazhirin v'omdim. But if it's the case that each house has a teacher present in the house, evening and morning and daytime, then there'll be a constant reminder to all the members of the household that they have to remember the Torah that they learned and that they were taught. And this will diminish sin and iniquity. And through this they will merit that which is written, I will give my dwelling among you. Right? That the temple, as it were, becomes spread out and is hosted in each and every Jewish home where there is a knowledgeable person able to teach and share his or her Torah wisdom with the other members of the family.
What proportion of families are going to be able to support, what proportion of families are going to be able to support a full-time teacher? There are people who are trying to home educate their kids, and it's not easy.
Right. So his point is that it's not a professional teacher. That it's right through the Maser Sheini, through the requirements to bring Maser Sheini and other food-related sacrifices and gifts to Jerusalem, that one member of the household will be forced to become a student of Torah in Jerusalem. And when that person comes back after they've distributed and after they spend time learning, so it's not a professional teacher that you're supporting, but it's your own flesh and blood, your own family member living with you who becomes a teacher.
There's Shlom Sion Hamalka, if I'm remembering it right, Salome Alexandra, she's also called, was the sister of Shimon ben Shetach, if I'm remembering it right.
Yeah.
And he's the one who's credited with her support, as I understand it, about 100 years plus before the destruction of the Bayit Sheini, that they instituted chedorim, so to speak, schools in many communities, so that the Torah learning would not be concentrated in Yerushalayim, and it wouldn't depend on the poverty of some people, or forcing people to go to the one place for study. It's a peculiar thing about how does it work out.
Yeah, so it's an interesting debate, right? It's an interesting philosophical question about what's a more effective educational model, right? Is it more effective to have experts and to have a centralized location where everyone is supposed to go, or to kind of spread it out and try to democratize it and make it much more accessible, right? Clearly, the model that the Sefer Chinuch is advocating, these people that go to distribute the Maser Sheini and spend some extra time learning in Jerusalem, they're not earning PhDs or smicha in the time that they're learning, but they are becoming educated lay people, able to hopefully make an influence on their family members when they get back home. Right, so it's an interesting philosophical educational debate about which model is more effective, right? And if this is the model by which Torah will be spread, so what does that mean for the poor who aren't landowners, who aren't going to Jerusalem because they don't have Maser Sheini to offer to bring? It's an important question. But he's sort of setting out a model and an ideal. It's quite an interesting way to think about it.
These are different views, though. It's not that there's only one way that's going to be followed.
Right.
I think if both, or possibly more, are followed, then people learn in these different ways, and society is magnified, in Torah knowledge through them.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, there's not a one size fits all here, and as is the case with our modern education, there's lots of different schools with lots of different approaches because not everything works the same for every person, and that's important. But it does raise an interesting question, and his vision of kind of bringing the temple to the people, I think is quite interesting. Right, the Torah gives us the mission, "Atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh," that the entire, right, you should be for me mamlechet kohanim, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So how does an entire nation be a kingdom of priests when only certain members are eligible for kahuna? So one answer is that we all can take on the role, the function of the kohanim, at least in the educational realm, and we all can kind of elevate ourselves to, if not literal priests, at least symbolic priests who are invested and involved in education and present and being good, positive religious role models.
Just want to throw into the ring. This is all based on the Tosefta in Kiddushin, that they're connecting it the second type to Torah study.
Right.
Is there any way in the Tosefta where they show how that's related? Because this is all built on, and I like this building, but the foundation is a little bit shaky.
I think it's in verse 23. I'll read it again. "Ve'achalta lifnei Hashem Elokecha b'makom asher yivchar l'shakein shmo sham, ma'aser degancha v'tiroshcha v'yitzarecha u'b'charot v'karcha v'tzonecha, l'man tilmad v'yirat Hashem Elokecha kol hayamim."
Okay, all right, that's what I was asking.
Yeah. So I don't think it's a stretch. I think it's a very plausible read of the psalm.
Yeah. Okay.
I thought, and I might have been incorrect, that the Levium were actually the teachers, since they were dispersed among all of Israel, and the Kohanim were the doctors, basically.
Yeah. So whether it's the Kohanim or the Levium, the tribe of Levi was certainly given the task of educating, and it's plenty of sources that indicate that that's what Kohanim were doing as well. Remember, the Kohanim only served, there was a short, 2 weeks that each Kohen family was in the temple. The rest of the time they were out and about teaching and doing other Kohen stuff.
Okay. So they had a rota, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay,
I just wanted to mention that the reason, I thought that one of the reasons for starting the teaching of the children, the historical background here at the sort of the end of kind of the Greek influence period and the beginning of the Roman period, as I recall, was just a terribly turbulent time. And the system of having the parent teach the child was really at risk because there were orphans. And it was a terrific amount of tumult going on, and these huge groups really at war with one another internally, with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and who knew when whom was going to be assassinated or what was going to happen. So the children coming in that way is a way of saying, okay, we have children and we may not have families where we have parents to teach them. And so it started sort of in that way, as I recall. That may not be the majority of them, but it certainly was part of the history.
Right, but but remember, we're reading. We're now discussing the Sefer Chinuch, which no one knows the exact authorship, but sometime in the Middle Ages, put him in the 13th or 14th century, right? Commenting, right? So it's possible what he's described is as often commentators do, is describing his reality or what he thinks reality should be for his time, trying to read that back into the earlier sources, or he's idealizing period when the temple was standing, so prior to the Greek destroying the temple, right? What the original vision was, kind of setting that up as his ideal. So I think you might be onto something as far as the education system Robert was describing that was established, but I'm not sure the Sefer Chinuch is commenting directly on that.
Right. Admittedly, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I meant to reference it back to that.
That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to end with two interesting ideas from the Alshich. The Alshich is someone that's quoted often. The Chama Leibowitz quotes him a lot, and I found fascinating when I went to open it on Sefaria. The biography opened up, and I wasn't aware of the biography, the history of the Alshich, which I found to be quite fascinating. He was a student of Yosef Karo, and was one of very few students who actually was given smicha by, real smicha by Yosef Karo. We know that Yosef Karo, he moved to Tzfat, and he wanted to reinstitute smicha and reconvene a Sanhedrin. That's something Rav Yosef Karo wanted to do, and he chose the Alshich to be one of those members of the Sanhedrin he wanted to be starting. So that's quite fascinating. And they say that he was, he was an amazing speaker, amazing darshan. And every week he would prepare his Shabbos drasha, and he would deliver it, and then other people would take what he said and give it over without giving him credit and steal his Torah ideas. So he published his drashot as the Sefer Alshich that we know, in order to prevent people from stealing his Torah, which was quite fascinating. So anyway, he says two interesting ideas. We won't see the whole thing inside. The first one, let's look at the English, number 11. So he's also bothered by how is it that that Master Sheini instills fear of God in us, right? And he says, how can eating and drinking in abundance of rejoicing teach people to be God-fearing? The text stated that you may learn to serve. I would have said that staying behind in Jerusalem in order to partake of second tithe would leave the pilgrim with time on his hands, free from his daily chores to study Torah. But in what way would it teach him to fear, as the text makes out? Perhaps the Holy One, blessed be He, commanded them to take a tithe of all their possessions to Jerusalem to deter them from repudiating the source of their bounty, and that they should realize that this wealth did not originate with the power of their own hands. It was as if they were giving the king his portion. This tithe is holy to the Lord, and from the table of the Most High. Okay, so it's back to the idea that we said at the very beginning, that it's to instill this sense of recognition of God and God's ultimate power and control over all that we experience and enjoy in the world. And so he puts that, the Maser Sheini, in the context of that we have to specifically take it to Jerusalem. I think this is the detail that was missing from the earlier comments we saw, but specifically take it to Jerusalem to remind you whatever you're eating is because you're because of Hashem. Having that heightened awareness of Hashem in the shadow of the temple will perhaps promote it. The second explanation, he says, and you can look at it inside on your own. I hope I didn't butcher the translation too badly. This one's my own translation. Is the fact that the Torah allows for transferring of the produce to money, right? So he says that, quite ironically, you often encounter a situation where those who are more, quote, blessed, those who are more wealthy, more successful, will make a claim that they can't be bothered with their religious duties and responsibilities because they're too busy with work, right? And the fact that God has granted them great success and has seemingly blessed them to be wealthy and to have all these possessions becomes their excuse for not properly recognizing God, for not properly serving God. You know, poor guy wants to take a week off and go to Jerusalem. That's fine, but my time is too valuable. I can't make that trip. You know, what's the pauper down the street going to do anyway? And even if you want me to come, how am I going to bring all of these? You know, I have a huge farm, I have a huge fields. How am I going to bring all the produce that my fields made? It's an impossible task. So he says that the Torah's recognition and allowance to convert the produce to money for the sake of Maser Sheini is the answer to this guy. Whatever excuse you're going to come up with, we have an answer. You can't. It's too difficult for you. You have to recognize that God gave you everything. It's too much to schlep. You can put it into money. And so therefore, he says it's a real Musar lesson to all of us whenever we make excuses for why we can't do what we know it is that we're supposed to be doing, because we have, quote, more important things and better ways to spend our time and our resources. He says that this is a very powerful reminder that's not the case. We have to always do what's right, and the Torah will bend over backwards to enable us to do it in a way that's not overly burdensome, which I thought was a beautiful idea, a beautiful Musar lesson we can all take, and made me realize why it is that people stole the Torah thoughts of the Alshech, because they're quite powerful and quite beautiful. So anyway, those are some thoughts on Maser Sheini. I hope it gives us what to think over, to mull over. And I think my title this year is the Torah Stimulus Plan. And I think that there's something really important in thinking about how we allocate our resources, how we set aside some of our money, even if we can't use it in the here and the now, to know this is for my trip to Israel. This is for when I have time to be able to, you know, to spend money on, to take a Torah class I really want to take, to set aside and make sure that we have that not only the money, the resources set aside, but the reminder to us of how we should be spending our time, how we should be allocating our valuable and limited resources. I think that Maser Sheini teaches us all of that and much more. Any final questions or thoughts on this? Yeah, Beatrice.
I had just one. I wanted to say that the excitement that could happen with the Sanhedrin. I mean, I think Arthur mentioned one time before that Rabbi Katz took us down to the Supreme Court. Now, admittedly, we didn't sit in on a session, but people do come just to sit in on the sessions to see what's happening. I mean, yeah. And for the Sanhedrin, it was constant. I mean, it's the evolving of the oral law itself, and they didn't write it down and put it on papyrus or anything to hand it around to everyone. I mean, it was something that would help people to talk with other Jews there in Yerushalayim. It would be very exciting to know, well, they're paskin this way. Well, why is that? And so on. That there was a terrific excitement about it, you know.
Yeah.
And that is another wonderful thing to think about and to hope that it will happen again.
I think that children and youth witnessing, being in these situations, get very, very strong impressions that are very lasting.
Yeah, for sure. Beatrice, you want to say something?
This might be a question for another time, but I've always been curious about the tithe for the poor, and it being once every 3 years, and how that's supposed to work. Like it's clearly not instead of tzedakah, because the poor need sustenance not just every 3 years. So how did that work? And was it like having a bonus? Was it to give people an extra lift? I've always been curious about
it's a great question. You know, for you're right, it's probably for a different time, you know, and you're right also that there are many required matanot la'aniyim, many required gifts to the poor. It wasn't only Maser Sheini, right? Every year we had Peah, we had Leket, Shechacha, we have Shemitah. So whether it was seen as a kind of a bonus or kind of a stimulus payment or donation to allow people to not be existing exactly at the poverty line, but maybe a little above. Yeah, those are all theories that are out there, but maybe a different time we'll have to explore some of the details of Maser Ani. Thank you. Great question.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. A scheduling note. I am traveling all of next week. I will be in 4 different cities, I think, every night of the week, a different city.
Safe journeys.
Thank you. So I love giving this class. I'm happy to do it on, the only night I can realistically do it would be Sunday night. Beatrice, you'll probably be passed out recovering from all of the excitement of the weekend, so we have no expectation for you. Are people interested in Sunday night, or should we just reconvene
Yeah.
the following?
Ann and I are.
Sure,
Okay.
definitely. I mean, you do a fantastic job. Come on.
Thanks.
Unfortunately, we're not available Sunday night.
Okay.
Well, we can check in on the recording.
Rena and I are.
All right. So we'll plan on Sunday night at 8 o'clock. We'll confirm that by email with everyone. And looking forward to Beatrice. Looking forward to the Shabbos. It's going to be wonderful. And have a great week, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
Okay.
much.
Thank you.